Hello, everyone. Right away, I want to thank you for coming back to my channel where we talk about all things reading, all things writing, and all things self-improvement. A lot of fun, that's for sure. Today is going to mark the second part of a video that I released a little while ago titled How to Prepare for a Job Interview. I closed the video out by mentioning that it's possible to over-prepare for a job interview, and that's what today's video is all about. How to properly prepare, or maybe put more precisely, how to avoid over-preparing. Really what I'm trying to do is put you in the best position I can to crush a job interview and get the job that you want. Preparing for most high-stakes events or scenarios, whatever the right word is, involves a dichotomy. It's a balancing act. And what that really means is that there aren't right ways to prepare and wrong ways to prepare necessarily. I'm sure it wouldn't be too tough to brainstorm an example of preparing a right way and preparing a wrong way. But assuming we're all mature enough to understand that that's just not that helpful, I'll try to put it more exactly. So there's a way in which more right ways of preparing can become less right ways of preparing. And that's what I want to talk about today. Putting you in the best possible position to actualize your potential and to reach your goals and get this job. It depends upon understanding the traps to avoid when we try to prepare for a job interview. So without further ado, let's dive in. Again, in the last video, I outlined a strategy to prepare for a job interview. The strategy involved writing through potential scenarios with the goal of using the rehearsal to make conscious a breadth of knowledge that can be tactfully turned to when the pressure is on, which is to say, when you're in the interview itself. But I want to say more about that. I want to say that there's a right way to build that breadth of knowledge and a wrong way, or at least a way that's more right and a way that's more wrong. And I'll talk about the more wrong way first. The wrong way involves trying to remember too much and trying to memorize. So it's important to say right off the bat that we aren't writing out potential questions and potential answers for the interview in an attempt to try and memorize these answers, to memorize the questions. In one of the literature courses I'm teaching at Johns Hopkins, we're reading Notes from Underground, a book that I really recommend to just about anyone who's interested in this video or any of my other videos more generally. But I bring it up because there's a famous passage in the book where the narrator declares that, quote, "Men are not the keys of a piano," end quote. And although it was working toward a different end in Notes from Underground, I think it makes an important point, which generally speaking pertains to what I'm talking about now. Okay, so men are not piano keys. We know this. Nobody is confusing their friends and families for black and white keys on the piano. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. What the quote means is this: human beings are not the kinds of creatures who are capable of constantly acting in a mechanical fashion. And I think that most people who have ever tried to memorize extensive amounts of information know this to be true. The point is this: memorizing is rarely a good plan for preparatory action. And a big part as to why memorization isn't a great guiding plan is because of what I said before. Human beings aren't something mechanical. We're fluid creatures. And I think effectively employing language makes use of, mankind's more fluid nature. But maybe memorization wasn't your plan from the get-go. That's good. But even if that is the case, I think it's worth talking about why you don't want to write with the goal of memorization, because I think it helps teach us about how we can employ a more precise mode of being. Memorization is too mechanical to be practically useful in a social environment. I think that's true most of the time. Social landscapes are kind of beyond absolute predictability. Conversations can change so quickly, and it's for that reason that I think it's best to steer clear of an aim that approximates anything close to memorization. That's not what we're trying to prepare for going into the interview. When we go into a job interview, memorizing answers just isn't going to be useful for the same reason memorizing answers for a first date isn't a great idea. Sure, some of what we memorize is going to be useful. If we prepare enough, there's a chance that what we dedicate time to memorizing winds up being of actual value to us. But odds are that isn't going to be the case. Odds are something else is going to happen. And what's probably going to happen is this: the best way to kill the natural, almost seductive flow of a conversation, which is to say, killing the energy of a conversation involving, just more than one person, is to first try to anticipate the course the conversation will take beforehand, and then trying to memorize answers or lay out an absolute plan based on your expectations. Great conversations, in my opinion, make use of a kind of creative flow state. They're a product of the parties involved focusing their attention on the development of a single idea or series of ideas that's at hand. Great conversations, in my opinion, make use of a kind of creative flow state. They're a product of both parties involved focusing their attention on the development of an idea or a series of ideas. Great conversations are like little invisible or maybe semi-visible works of art. And maybe at this point you're thinking, wait, weren't we talking about job interviews like 2 seconds ago? How did we get here? And to that, I'll say yes, we were. We were just talking about job interviews, and now we're talking about conversations. And that's because the best way you can really prepare for an interview, in my opinion, is to just be a good conversationalist, which, yes, is obviously easier said than done, but this is what you should be trying to do when you use writing to prepare for a job interview. You shouldn't be trying to memorize answers to questions that you expect to be asked, because that makes for a terrible conversation. It makes for a conversation that feels two-dimensional because it's removed from the present. It's removed insofar as your attempt to memorize answers was done at an earlier point in time and is therefore, divorced from the present conversation itself. When you're preparing for a job interview and you're writing your way through answers to hypothetical questions, you're not trying to force yourself to memorize the wide array of ideas you're setting out before you. You're trying to familiarize yourself with the landscape you're likely to encounter at a future date. You're rehearsing answers so that when the time comes, the probability that you're able to not only answer the question, but answer the question in such a way that does justice to, let's say, the governing logic of the event itself, of the interview itself, and at the same time, the personality of the person sitting across from you. That's why you're preparing. You're preparing to try and construct an engaging and meaningful conversation, even though, the lens of the conversation itself, let's say the governing logic of it, is a job interview. And this goes back to something I've said before. Conversing with other people is a practicable skill. It's an art form. So with that in mind, our preparation has to take into account two important factors. And the first is this: ask yourself, what can I do to make this conversation go smoothly, to go as smooth as possible? And the second is, how will the circumstances of the event itself, which is in this case a job interview, influence the course and the boundaries that the conversation can take on? And that's what I'm going to be talking about in my next video about preparing for a job interview. It's devising a strategy for the act of conversation as that strategy pertains to speaking, and at the same time speaking in an environment that isn't casual or laid back, but rather, high stakes and potentially really nerve-wracking. But in closing, I just want to say that preparing for difficult situations is important. It's something you have to do if you're serious about actualizing your full potential and achieving your goals. But that doesn't mean that the act of preparing can't or won't end up working against us. Too much practice, or practice that is done without a long-term strategy in mind, or like, let's say, a why, as I've mentioned it in other videos, can almost paradoxically accomplish the exact opposite of what we intend if we aren't careful. So what's our long-term strategy to use writing to prepare for a job interview? We're writing to try and familiarize ourselves with the world and the circumstances of the job interview. We aren't trying to memorize responses, we're trying to familiarize ourselves with a wide enough array of questions and answers so that, when we are asked something difficult, we can respond in a way that feels fluid and tightly connected to the present moment. And in that way, the conversation becomes something musical and harmonious. And I think that's how you leave a lasting impression walking out of a job interview. It's the ability to create some sort of meaningful connection between you and the person interviewing you, the person sitting across from you, or the people sitting across from you, relying solely on information or answers, let's say, that pertain to the questions that are asked of you. And I'm not saying that's easy, but that's the goal we're working toward when we think about preparing for the job interview. We're trying to create the kind of conversation that is engaging and is meaningful, and in that way, the conversation can create an impression that lasts, that when we leave, it remains and it sticks around in the back of our interviewer's head. If you're stressed out about an interview, it might help to just think of it as a conversation. That might not make it stress-free, let's say, but I think it can help give you some idea of how you should move forward and about how to navigate the situation itself. You're trying to talk about yourself and the skills you have in a way that engages the person who's interviewing you. So go in with the idea in mind that you can help them just as much as they can help you, that there's some kind of mutually beneficial set of circumstances that can arise from this interaction. And if you go in with that goal, the probability that you will come out successful, that you will come out having, created the kind of dialogue that people remember when they leave, I think the probability is increased. And that's really how you set yourself up to be successful, how you set yourself up to get the job that you want. And that's what I want for you. Okay, and with that, I now just want to say thank you for sticking with me through this video. I want to thank my video editors, Bach and Joe. I appreciate all of your help. As always, I want to thank you, my lovely viewer. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful or helpful or interesting or whatever it might be, I ask that you please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. It really helps me produce more content. But yeah, thanks everyone. I hope you have a nice day, and I hope you crush that job interview.